Hello and welcome to ATARC's webinar series. Today, topic experts will share strategies that agencies can implement to alleviate the concern of the unknown and make operations more efficient. My name is Kirsten Patton. I am a business performance consultant over at Dale Carnegie in Tampa Bay, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's panel discussion. ATARC stands for the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center, and we are a nonprofit that facilitates collaboration through government, industry, and academia in order to accelerate technology modernization initiatives. We provide ongoing opportunities for cross-agency collaboration through on-site interaction, learning, and market research. I would like to welcome all of our attendees joining us today, and a special thanks to Rita Walston and the entire Snowflake team for helping us organize today's webinar. This afternoon, we will hear from each of our panelists, and we will also have a Q&A session where you can submit questions of your own in the Q&A section of this platform. Also, remember, if you would like to receive your CPE credit for attending today's event, to answer the poll questions as they come up throughout the discussion. That all being said, I would now like to welcome our panelists to please come on camera, and you can go ahead and unmute yourself because we're going to start with a round of introductions. So please share with us who you are, what agency or organization you're with, what your role is there, and anything else you'd like to share with our audience at this time. Let's start with Michelle Thomas, please.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Michelle Thomas. I am the Deputy CTO at the Department of Labor.
Fantastic, thank you. Over to you, Sarah.
Hi, my name is Sarah Ejaz. Thank you so much for having me as part of this conversation today. I am the Assistant CFO for Systems at the Department of Housing and Urban Development at HUD. And my office has been, over the past year and a half, looking and exploring the use of our data to support a lot of analytics and a lot of the work that can kind of lead us towards more advanced uses of ML and AI. So I'm excited about the conversation today.
Great, thank you. And over to you, Paul.
Thank you so much. I'm Paul Horan. I'm the principal sales engineer for Snowflake Public Sector. I've been with them about 5 years, but my career in IT and specifically with data-related technologies extends back to the mid-'80s. And so I'm excited to be part of this panel today in this intriguing discussion.
Thank you. Yes, it'll be great to have a mix of government and industry perspectives. So happy to have you all here. Okay, let's start it off with the first question. Michelle, maybe you can kick us off for this one. What are some of the major shifts and transitions that you've been seeing when it comes to the use of AI and data analytics within federal agencies?
The biggest thing, in my opinion, is culture. The resistance to change, the resistance to a new process. Everybody's excited about improving work and reducing the amount of labor that they have to put into fulfilling their mission. But I think it's ubiquitous across agencies. It's not just us, but this resistance to change and fear of the unknown, possibly. I know a lot of people read articles in the press about AI and responsible AI and all those kinds of things. And I think for some people, it's kind of scary. And so I think what the AI community is trying to do, and this is my opinion again, is trying to show what it can do from an improvement to your workload, making things easier, easing the burden of time that you have to perform the tasks that you need to perform so that you can focus on other mission-related things. So my answer is culture is the biggest thing.
Absolutely. And I would love to pull on that thread a little bit too, around what are the kind of pushbacks, examples that you regularly see or hear, and how do you help mitigate those concerns?
Transparency, answering questions directly, We have a terrific team here, and I'm not the expert on AI. We have experts in the office of the CIO or CTO, but the point is that listening to people, listening to their requirements, and proposing ways to do things better, faster, cheaper, right? Doing the kinds of mundane tasks that take us away from possibly doing what we think is more mission related in terms of what our job objectives are. So I think that clarity, that transparency of understanding what the business requirements are and how can we apply this kind of technology, AI, machine learning, whatever, how can we apply that to the business requirement and make it easier, better, sometimes faster, sometimes cheaper.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. So Michelle touched on culture. Sarah, what would you like to add to that in terms of major shifts or transitions that you've been seeing in agencies?
Sure. So I definitely agree culture is a big thing. I think it comes a little bit from a different perspective of culture. Like a lot of sort of organic use of data and wanting to use it to support a lot of business processes. So, there are folks that are starting to join the agency that have skill sets around the use of data, using analytics, using Power BI, using the tools that are like readily available at their desktops. And so you see this organic kind of growth that's happening around the department where people are starting to use their data to be able to support their business decisions and their operations. And so I think that's definitely been a big shift. It's probably much like when PowerPoint and Excel first came out and people were starting to use it more broadly, and then it became a staple, right? And so you're starting to see the use of data become more of a staple in people's operations. And so that's a big shift from a couple of years ago. And it's interesting because you do have those that are a little bit more resistant to change, but you're starting to see a lot more of the organic kind of growth in the use of data. And especially when you have some of these tools available and, some of them are starting to go into, you used to build macros on the regular, and now you're starting to do something a little more advanced with that and starting to use a little more automated tools or, software that allows you to do some more complex type of automation. So there's a lot of growth and it's happening very quickly and it's happening kind of organically. So definitely interesting to see where this is all going to lead.
Yeah. And what have you done over at HUD or seen people do to help mitigate those people that are pushing back or the concerns that they might express around the adoption of it?
Yeah, it's almost like folks are starting to realize that they need to pay attention. This isn't something that's kind of going away, right? So I'm not sure if we're seeing much more in terms of resistance to just the plain analytics. When you start going more to sort of maybe some AI components, then you'll see a lot more, I think, type of resistance because that's still like an unknown. People are still kind of figuring out what does that mean? How much control do I lose when I implement something there? But so it's almost like you're at the first step when you're just getting to the analytics part, building the knowledge base, the experience there, getting people comfortable with that change will slowly lead to, being able to become more comfortable with later changes. But there's a lot of conversations, I'm in a CFO shop. So obviously there's a lot of conversations around internal controls and documentation, things like that can kind of help bridge the gap of how comfortable am I with what this computer is doing without me knowing what's happening. So there's a lot that can kind of be used to help mitigate some of that.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. And Paul, over to you from the industry side. Based on what Michelle and Sarah have just shared, what are some of your perspectives that you could share with us?
Sure, thanks. Some of the biggest shifts and changes and trends that I'm seeing out in the industries, in the agencies that I work with, is that AI and ML as a technology is really transitioning out of that science project phase and becoming a tool to drive business decisions. especially for those agencies that are farther along the learning curve and adopted a more modern data-driven approach to decision making. For the most part, I think historically, federal agencies have trailed the private sector when it comes to experimenting with new technologies and being farther along the adoption curve. That they're sort of the proving ground for these technologies, as it were. But I'm definitely seeing that the trust in the answers that these algorithms are generating, the trust is growing. And I think what's helped that trust evolve and grow is the fact that we benefit from AI and ML on a daily basis, even if we don't realize that it's happening. Everyone with a cell phone in their pocket has one of the most complex and innovative cloud-based AI ML applications ever developed. We can ask it a question in natural language, and it understands our language and responds to us in a human voice. That human persona has helped alleviate some of the fear and doubt in trusting these technologies. Natural language processing and speech recognition and neural networking. An example of that is my wife and I both use the same traffic guidance app on our phones, but it will recommend to us different routes for each of us based on the fact that it has learned our driving patterns, and that my wife tends to avoid highway driving, wants to stay off the beltway as much as possible. And so it has learned from its experience over us. That neural network has grown, and the output from these algorithms is becoming more and more a part of our daily lives. I think we'll continue to see agencies adopt these technologies in greater numbers as we deal with the harder and harder problems of running the government.
Great, thank you, Paul. Any other comments from our panelists there before I move on to an audience question? Okay, well, on that note, I would like to direct Michelle, Sarah, and Paul your attention over to Katie Jones. She has an audience question in the chat, so please go ahead and review that question, and then I'll call on it. But in the meantime, I'm going to ask if we could please pop up poll question number 1 for our audience, which will be up on the screen momentarily. Okay, for the audience, where are you as an organization in using AI ML? Where are you in your journey? We'll give our audience a moment to respond to that. And then I'm going to pivot back over to Katie Jones. She asks, how do you think AI is going to change the staffing industry? What are some of the changes we can see in recruitment methodology and hiring within the workforce? So from our panelists, any responses there? Go ahead, Michelle.
So that's an interesting question. I think, oh, look at that, a lot of beginning. Excuse me. So finding qualified candidates with the education, training, and experience in the desired area of computer science or business analytics is always a challenge, and it's more challenging now after the worst of the pandemic, and we know that from reading the news, right? So I know that the whole experience with the pandemic has changed our recruiting methodology. That's another thing. But I think from the standpoint of the question that Katie has asked, the way that I see agencies that I collaborate with handling this is the same way we are. We form relationships with universities that have specialties in the areas that we're looking for. We obviously advertise on USA Jobs. We put the requirements that we're seeking there, but we also have other avenues. And one of them is these partnerships with these universities that specialize in these areas. There are also presidential fellowships that we can leverage, right? But I think from what I've read in the press and what I've seen experienced here and at other agencies is there's a shortage and a big challenge in finding people that have the data science background and the data management background to be able to address some of these issues. And so we're competing against ourselves in some ways, right? Because the private sector is also looking for the same thing. It's not unique to government agencies, state, federal, or local. And I think that this is going to continue for some time.
Thank you, Michelle, for that perspective. Sarah or Paul, any thoughts around that?
Yeah.
Sure. Oh, please go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. So I was just gonna share. So my my two daughters are both in college, and I've noticed a lot of the universities and colleges now have programs that are very much starting to add analytics type of things, R, Python, those to their curriculum, and are starting to incorporate it into a lot of the coursework that this new coming workforce is starting to put under their belts. And so that's kind of encouraging. I think in the federal government, we will always kind of struggle with, competing with industry and others and finding the right skill set to be able to support a lot of this work. The CFO Council actually has done a lot of work around looking at which job series is like a good series to use to be able to get a data scientist, because none of them kind of fit quite right. If you go towards some of the more statistical type of series, you don't tend to have some of the business or operations type of knowledge or experience to be able to kind of help with that side. You go too much towards the analyst, you might not have some of the core things that are on the statistical side. So there's been a lot of research that's been done, and some best practices I think the CFO Council has also put out about how to be able to find the people with the right skill sets and maybe what job series you post to be able to kind of help with recruitment in this area. And I know a lot of agencies have actually started putting together their own position descriptions and vacancy announcements. If you go onto USA Jobs now and you do a search for financial data analyst, I know it's there because we've used it. So there's new like position descriptions, new categories that are sort of starting to develop off of the existing sort of needs that we used to have in place.
Thank you, Sarah. And go ahead, Paul.
So it's important to remember that there's not just one role that is used in the AI and ML workflow. I mean, sure, you have data engineers who are technologists who know how to manipulate data and prepare it and curate it and make it ready for the ingestion into an ML model. But there are also data scientists who understand the algorithms and the statistical packages and which one to use when. And there's also the subject matter expert, the person that can look at the data going in and the outputs coming out that can make heads or tails of that. I think with the technology landscape changing so quickly, I don't know how any university plans a curriculum and then delivers courseware for a technology that could be out of favor in 6 months. The techniques are, I would say, anyone who has a generic knowledge of the underlying technologies can switch gears and transition into a new role as new technologies come into favor. This is a situation I think that will resolve itself, and industry will respond with appropriate technologies to make the difficulty of this process much simpler.
Thank you, Paul. Any other comments from panelists before we move on?
I was just going to add, so I know there's been, when in the federal government, if you're struggling to find the right resources that apply, or, finding the right candidate that might fit a position, there's underlying things that you look for, right? Underlying characteristics in their applications that can still help you determine whether they'd be a good fit. There are things that you would look for where, how do they react to a situation? What's the logic or thought process that they take in a specific situation? So there's still ways to be able to find strong candidates that you can build into the right role if you can't find, the person who just is able to fit into what you're looking for.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. All right, pivoting back to my questions now. Paul, I want to start with you on this one since you are industry. What role do you think industry can play when it comes to helping agencies identify and leverage the emerging capabilities of AI and ML?
Well, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious, but it's important for us to listen to our customers, listen to our constituents out in the field, whether that's the agencies themselves or our, systems integration partners. They're the ones out there in the trenches trying to accomplish whatever the mission happens to be for that particular agency. So they'll have the best perspective on what's working and what's not. The AI/ML workflow has the three distinct phases: the prepare, the model construction, and then the deployment or operationalization of that model. And it's that first phase, from my perspective, that presents the most opportunity for industry to step in and smooth out the rough edges there. Some estimates say that up to 70% of the man hours expended to build and operationalize an ML model is in that data prep stage. So that's where the opportunity exists. Industry can step up and make it not so complex to find new data sets, to enhance data sets, maybe with publicly available or privately available data sets, to streamline and to smooth that particular process. You'll shorten the overall timeline of delivering an effective model.
Thank you, Paul. And then I want to hear from our two government agencies represented here too. How do you feel like the best way to work together and, have that relationship with industry looks like? Michelle, let's start with you, please.
Sure. I think the ability to successfully work with industry for the kinds of outcomes that we're talking about here, that Paul mentioned, is there has to be a certain level of maturity in terms of data management and data governance on the user side, right? No matter what the agency is. And not everybody's at the same level. And so I think in order to get the kind of outcomes, the results from the analytics and the AI and the ML work, we need to have it's game on, right? So we need to have the maturity level. We need to have some sort of data management in process or achieved. We need to have governance for data. When you're talking about large agencies like DHS or HHS, they have gobs, that's a technical term, gobs of data. And so we saw during the pandemic where there were imperfect results and political outcomes because data wasn't shared, because data couldn't be shared because of technical obstacles, right? Or sometimes cultural obstacles. And so having all of that in place, I think, is very important to getting the kinds of outcomes and using the kind of tools from the company that Paul represents and others to achieve the things that we need to achieve. There's too much data out there to not consider that data management, data governance, in my opinion.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. It's game on. Sarah, what about you? Let me hear your perspective.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with both Paul and Michelle about laying the foundation and understanding the data that you have and how you can use it. So a lot of the work, like I mentioned before, over the past year and a year and a half, we've been doing in my office is around getting us to a level of maturity with our data to be able to enable us to be able to do more type of advanced analytics. And so understanding our landscape, like sort of what are we currently doing, what are our current practices, like putting in place sort of an assessment to check that and identify where the gaps are. What are the measurements we're going to use to measure whether we're being successful in improving our maturity, and then setting goals, against those, sort of a roadmap that we've established in terms of how we will work on maturing our data practices. And for the role that sort of industry plays in all of that, I think it's very important for industry partners to really have a good understanding of what value they're going to add to any agency when they're approaching them. And keeping that focus on value add. You hear time and again, we can do this, X, Y, Z. And then the next person comes around and they can do X, Y, Z. But really focusing on what is that value and understanding the environment you're walking into, what the current obstacles are, and being able to help maneuver around those obstacles to gain success. That's what stands out to me as somebody who I think would be a strong partner in being able to accomplish results.
Yeah, very well said. Any other comments on that before we move on? All right.
I think one of the roles of industry is to try to make things simpler. I mean, if you look at the technology stack that's involved in developing AI and ML workflows today, it can be dauntingly complex, and that keeps people out of expanding this. It shouldn't be this hard to find people that can do this sort of work. So by making the tech stack easier, by simplifying it from end to end, I think you'll widen the talent pool of available technology professionals that can step in and help out. I think that's on us to try to find out where are the big rocks in this workflow that we can take out of the process and shorten it and simplify it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Michelle?
I was just going to add something that Sarah said triggered the thought that we're all using different platforms in the cloud. SaaS platforms in particular is what I'm thinking. Salesforce, Appian, whatever. Those store a lot of data. And so we need to also look at industry in terms of partnerships with between themselves and with us, to look at how we leverage and work with the capabilities of these platforms, some of whom are talking about and advertising the fact that, hey, we can do AI, we've got this capability and that capability. It's not necessarily an end all, but it's a capability we may want to leverage in a greater whole in partnership with other companies, other industry companies that have solutions that may look at things from an enterprise level as opposed to a platform level. And so when it comes to leveraging tools, I think we need to bear that in mind, because a lot of us use these platforms, and we need to include them in the solutioning, I think.
Great, thank you.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah.
So one of the things I think it's really important about all of this work is keeping our horizon kind of wide and broad. So one of the things that I live in the state of Virginia. And so one of the things that I've been doing is Virginia's Chief Data Officer office does a lot. It's out there, it's providing information about how they're doing things. They're doing open data sets. So it's very kind of nice to see, I am all day, every day at the federal level, but to see what's happening at the state levels or the local levels and the use of their data and how they're maturing their data practices, it gives you a little bit of a more appreciation for maybe how to get around an obstacle or something that you might be looking at. So, and true for academia as well, right? There's a lot going on there. So it's just, I love Paul's comment about keeping it simple. My goodness, if we could get there, that would be great.
Excellent points. And Michelle and Sarah, want to turn your attention to the Q&A chat. We'll get to that in a moment. A question from Asit Patel came in. In the meantime, I'm also going to call for poll question number 2. We could pop that up on the screen. What are the prime barriers to AI adoption that your agency is facing? If you are in our audience, please respond to that poll question. And back to the question from Asit Patel. He wants to know from our government panelists, when you are selecting to work with a vendor or partner, do you ever consider any intellectual property patents on their AI technology or any other factors that we haven't already discussed?
So I guess I can go first. So I don't think we have actually procured any AI technology per se. We probably have done more analytics or automation type of technology. And so I'm sure it'd be consideration as we're thinking about how to be able to approach it. Ultimately, the government works for the benefit of the people. And so we need to ensure that, whatever we are doing or investing in is something that will continue to support the mission of the department. And so I'm not sure. I think when I get to that point of we're actually looking at using some specific AI technology, this patent, that we would have to kind of think that out a little bit. So sorry, I'm not sure if that's much of help.
Oh, no, thank you for responding. Michelle, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I can offer a few. The intellectual property patents part, that's what we leave for our legal partners in our agencies, right? General counsel or solicitor general, whatever. I do know in my experience throughout my career, and I've got 25 years in, the government, when work is awarded through a contract, possibly disagree with me in certain cases, but I'm saying generally the work that the contractor performs is government property and it can be shared within the government. So on the consideration of what do we look for in terms of our contractor partners, in terms of experience, in my experience, you have to understand what your business requirements are to understand what you need or who you need to partner with. So it's in our best interest to clearly define our business requirements so that we can look at who our best partner might be, or the best team, or even what vehicle we can use, right? So if we want to get a contract, say a blanket purchase agreement, a BPA for analytics support services, business analytics, data analytics support services, we need to look at how fast do we need the service? How broad do we want to consider partnerships? And there are a lot of good government vehicles, government-wide acquisition contracts, GWACs, that we can use. Or do we want our agency to establish a new contract? There are pros and cons for each. And I think the business requirements need to drive that. And I see time and again over the years how we can do a less than 100% delivery of what our business requirements are when we solicit a contract, right? And then sometimes we end up in a world where we have the wrong partner, or we find that we missed some contracts and we find out that the partner isn't capable of fulfilling that end of the agreement. So I think the onus is on us to work diligently to define our requirements so that we can find the right partner with the right experience. We can't expect them to know or understand what the experience needs to be if we can't articulate what we're looking for and what our outcomes are. What do we consider our success factors and those types of things. So I think that's all. Also very
Thank
important.
you there. Okay, great. So moving back to my questions now, Sarah, I'd love to start with you this time. What are some AI ML use cases or examples that you can provide that you've seen be adopted? And going off of that example, what problems have they been trying to solve?
Sure. There's a couple of projects that we've started as prototypes to see how they would kind of far out. There's other data where, in the CFO shot, obviously we are the stewards for the financial data. So we've been looking at how we can use the financial data to support different operational needs. So one of the things that we were taking a look at is more in the disaster funding area and looking at programs and their execution of those funds. And so there's now been, multiple disasters, how quickly are we able to make those funds available to folks? If we look back at the historical sort of the time it took to get the funds to those that need it, looking at that historical data has helped support us in decision making about how we can use or how quickly we can get those funds available now. So that's sort of like a light touch one. We also had another one where we looked at sort of the for a small team that had lost quite a number of folks. They needed to help sort of prioritizing to focus on specific cases where they can spend their time and direction. And so there's a team that basically had almost like a dossier on our grantees that specifically identified different triggers or factors that would initiate the need for a review and thresholds. And those thresholds and triggers and factors helped develop a score, and that overall score would help determine, what are the high risk entities that would be in the higher ranking or prioritization in order to be able to say, okay, team of 2, you go and assess this entity, team of 2, you go assess this entity. So it helped kind of prioritize resources, looking back at historical and collected data, and be able to pull that together into a risk score that would identify sort of those that would be kind of more high risk and those that would help kind of focus our resources. So those are the two that we kind of have helped. There's other things going on around the department. Like I said, it's so organically growing in different places. So a lot of the work that I'm doing through the FinSight program is establishing sort of the mechanisms to be able to support some of that, like I mentioned before. And so, the hope is to be able to lay that groundwork so we can iterate faster.
Great. Thank you for sharing those examples with us. Michelle, how about you? Any use cases that you can think of that you'd like to share?
I can think of one right off the top of my head. It's something that I'm sure people within my agency and others have thought of, but all of us have an IT service desk, whether we use Remedy or ServiceNow or some other platform. I know because we're a ServiceNow user, there are some AI capabilities to leverage some of the things that Sarah talked about, that, the status of tickets, how many different kinds of categories of tickets are we looking at this week, this day, this hour. We field thousands of calls a day, and the tickets range from my computer isn't working to I want to order some new software to do XYZ. I want Power BI. You mentioned that earlier, Sarah, installed on my computer. So the kinds of analytics that we're doing are not based on AI right now. What's in the platform, we're not exercising the capabilities, all the capabilities that it has, but I can see things like AI really taking off when it comes in general to service desk services that agencies have, because there's a lot of money tied into it. It's a substantial investment of time of the technicians that take the calls, the licensing to provide the platform to people, all the different kinds of requests, and how much can you automate, and what is the cost saving and the time saving. All of that can be measured. The platforms have all the data. They have so much data that we don't leverage, and they're coming out with new and great capabilities to add to the kinds of things that we can bring out and use that data to manage our business life, right? The things that we can do, and making the things better, and give us more data to make better data-driven decisions. That's what I see. the case management systems that people build in Salesforce or Appian or other platforms. The same thing applies. I just use Service Desk as an example, but I think that's an example that is pervasive across every enterprise in every business. No matter what platform they're using something, and that something has a voluminous amount of data that's not being exercised. And so AI presents a possibility to use it, to leverage it for better purpose.
Yeah, if I could just piggyback off that a little bit. So one of the things that we've been thinking about is like, what's the right metric or measure, and what's the right interval of having data, so that you can actually build the model where you are able to, look at that progression over time in order to be able to then predict what will happen later. So like having like a really good conversation about like what's the right metric and at what time interval it should be collected so that you can do that has been really important in looking at how do we kind of set those guardrails.
And that can be thought of in multiple ways, right, Sarah? So if you have a contractor, you can set metrics to measure the performance of the contractor. You can also set metrics to measure the performance of your various business units in your agency. It's a really great point.
Yep.
Hey, thank you both. And Paul, anything that you would like to add from your standpoint?
Sure. One of the big ones that I'm seeing specifically at an agency that I'm working with is fraud, waste, and abuse. Detecting patterns in the transactions to determine if there are fraudulent or improper payments being made for insurance claims. A recent study by the GAO estimated a fraud rate somewhere between 3 and 6%. If you which puts it into the billions of dollars of taxpayer dollars that could be recovered if we were able to detect and prevent those claims from being filed in the first place. Compare that to the major banks, which have used AI and ML for years to drive credit card fraud down to about 0.04%. So it's possible. This problem is solvable with these technologies, and we're working very hard to help our clients implement that. Another one, to piggyback on the call log or the help desk, to take the actual audio transcriptions of the phone calls that were made or the text chats and pump those through sentiment analysis to determine how did this constituent, how did this customer, what were they feeling as they made this call? How can we improve our customer service experience, to this, vital population that we serve? The use cases are endless, but you've got to start with a well-defined problem. What are we trying to solve? If it's just a fishing trip to look at a big pot of data and try to derive, insight out of that, that's like sitting on a haystack until you get poked in the rear end. You're never going to find an effective solution there.
Thank you, Paul. Any other comments before we move on? Okay, I'm going to call for our last poll question now then, if we could please get that up on the screen. Does your organization offer office-wide AI and data analytics training when new problems occur? Okay, please respond. Okay, so starting with Michelle again this time. Michelle, what challenges are being encountered or you've seen encountered on this journey towards implementing these workloads?
Well, we've talked about some of them. One is getting the right staff, finding the right talent. And another one, to be honest, and this is not limited to federal agencies, is money, the budget, right? Having the budget to have the funding to initiate some of these things. Some of them are not very costly, some of them are. So, my comment earlier about the platforms, if you're using a platform and you have the license and the license entitles you to use the capability and you're not exercising it, that's an avenue where no extra cost for licensing is needed. You may have some development costs, but licensing can be very expensive for some things, right? So there's that. So the talent, the budget, and another thing is, we've talked about also is knowing what you need, the requirements. What is it that you're looking out to do? Well, Paul described it differently than all of us, but we're all right. We're all describing things around the same issue. That's what I would say.
And why do you think that knowing those requirements is such an issue? What is the root cause of that?
Well, there was a question that popped up not a few minutes ago about use cases, right? Being able to define the use cases that Paul was alluding to, whether it's unemployment fraud or some of the use cases that Sarah was describing, being able to articulate what is the business need, what is the business use case that we can craft a solution around. What are we trying to solve? I think Paul asked that question, right? And that's it. Understanding what your requirements are and being able to clearly and simply articulate them.
Yeah. Thank you, Michelle. Okay, Sarah, over to you. Any other challenges that we haven't mentioned or anything that sticks out to you?
Yeah, I think Michelle got it right. I mean, I think those are the primary things that, I'm also seeing. There's also like this just demand. Sometimes people don't know what they want, but they're like, we are going to use AI or ML for this. And we're like, okay, so what are you trying to do? So it's just this, like, I think a lot of interests, a lot of ideas that are circulating around. And then the comment that also Michelle, I think, commented about that came up in the chat there, having the focused prioritization to like, where do you put those resources? And then coming together to be able to be like, okay, let's all focus on solving this problem. Having the ability to kind of just weed out and then really have the prioritization identified and then having the funding lined up. The 3-year budget cycle doesn't help with any type of IT change, but like when you get to these types of things where, things are iterating and changing every 6 months, and that's where you have to kind of key back into what Michelle is saying in the business need and clear and understanding of what the requirements are in order to be able to get that into some sort of funding request and being able to identify that, you can show success there that can kind of help pave the way. But there's a lot that can be done. But I think there's also like these barriers that, we have to kind of work through and figure out how to get past.
Mm-hmm. And Paul, what about you? Would you like to share some insights on that as well?
Oh, sure. The challenges, from my perspective, are that the questions we're asking of the data are just plain harder. And if you think about traditional business intelligence, the Tableaus and Power BIs and AWS QuickSight and those tools that visualize, they're backwards looking. They look at what you've already determined. They answer the questions, well, what happened? AI and ML is forward looking. They're answering things like why something happened, diagnostic analytics, what was the causality of an event or a trend? Predictive analytics tries to predict the future based on the past. What's going to happen? What's the probability of this specific event? And then prescriptive analytics says, what actions can we take to cause a specific event to happen? How can we steer behavior into the future? And those are hard questions. They don't map into traditional database structures. They require, a much larger, much broader technology stack to answer. And so that finding and retaining the IT professionals that know how to do that, know how to ask those questions, to stand up those technology stacks, someone becomes an expert in that, and then here comes private industry, private sector to steal them away and double their paycheck. I think the easiest way we can respond to that challenge as a public sector, both industry and of course the government, like I said before, we'll simplify the technology stack. We'll find tools and platforms that don't require, a PhD to operate. It doesn't have to be that hard. Let's widen the talent pool to be able to bring these technologies forward and move along the adoption curve.
Right, well said. Okay, and I think we have time for one more question before we end our panel discussion. So let's start with Sarah, this time.
Mhm.
How do you see your agency could be supported regarding AI and ML use cases, and specifically the support for the data scientist?
Yeah, so it's interesting because, HUD, in the past, data science has played a big part in a lot of the work that the department has already done for many years, right? Like we have studies that look at how our funds have been used for decades, going back decades, and you look at that and you look at what data scientists in those offices have been doing, for years, and it's building upon that, right? It's taking that and looking at other uses of that data beyond what that maybe that original research question was. So like you see a lot more sort of like a third dimension kind of coming into maybe what was traditionally done as part of like some of the data science work in the government. And so you start seeing how we can use that data in a more flexible way to be able to answer other questions that can be that can come up in other parts of the department. So you see where we're probably like going down this path, and all of a sudden now with the technology that's come in place and the capabilities and knowledge and experience, we're able to just kind of widen that path into different ways, and being able to kind of set the foundation and structure for that is super impactful and helpful.
Great, thank you, Sarah. And Michelle, what are some of your thoughts around that?
I like something that Paul was talking about, which is making it simpler so that you don't need a PhD to use it or to figure out what it is. I really like that. And I think that, we talk in the, you read stories in the press and you hear on the news, and we talk about, the citizen being able to do this, that, and the other. Well, some very simple changes, whether we use AI or analytics, some very simple changes can be made to invite people to participate as opposed to scare them away from participating because of the complexity of that participation. So the easier you can make things, one of the things I focus on with one of the projects that I'm working on right now is let's make it simple to use, crisp to look at, and intuitive to use. That user experience can break anything and everything you attempt to do if you don't do it right with that crisp simplicity and clarity in mind. And so that's a huge challenge for the AI community, right? I know that. But I think we've got some really clever and smart people in government and in the private sector that can help us with that. Paul was talking about unemployment insurance fraud. Well, there's several aspects to that, right? There's the people that want to report it. There's the people at the state level that have to deal with it. And then there's the law enforcement aspect of it, of the people that are investigating it. If we make their job so cumbersome and so complex and hard to perform, we're never going to achieve the kind of things that we need to, which is to lessen it, to stop it, so that the people who need the services that the government provides can get them. Right. And so that gets back to the clear, the simple, the user experience. And I think that's huge.
Thank you, Michelle. And Paul, I want to hear from you too.
So support for the data scientist, obviously, my job at Snowflake is to try to make this workflow easier for my customers who are trying to explore and expand data science as a workload in the Snowflake platform. One of the key initiatives that we're introducing, think about the languages that you have to work with. If you're a data scientist, the language of choice is becoming Python. But when you need to go back to the database and get data out to actually operate on, you have to take that Python hat off and put your SQL hat on, and now you got to write in a different language to go get data. And that context switch has been, a lot of developers find that very jarring. So we're introducing abilities in our platform to stay in that language of choice, whether it's Java or Scala or Python, or if you like SQL, you can stay in SQL and develop that seamless experience where you're not having to switch languages just to get a simple job done. We're also trying to bring the processing closer to where the data lives, rather than having a separate computing environment that needs a different administrator to stand up and operate. We can take all of those routines and drop them into the Snowflake engine and run them right next to where the data lives, minimizing the traffic, minimizing the overall complexity of the end-to-end stack. So, we're working to support the data science initiative, not just from the data engineering piece of it, which we pretty much already have accomplished, but also that build and training models and then deploying and operationalizing them. We really want to be that data cloud, that data platform where all of that processing can happen.
Oh, great. Thank you so much, Paul, for those insights. So we're coming up at the end of our time here today, but I want to give you each a moment to share your final words with our audience and any key takeaway that you really got from this conversation that you want all of our folks back home to walk away with as well. So let's start with Michelle first on this, please.
Well, it's always nice sharing experiences with other agencies because I find a tremendous amount of learning out of listening to the experience that other people have, and the same for industry. I mean, it's nice to hear that an industry partner like Snowflake is focusing on the things that we find challenging, which is the simplicity. How does that help us? It can help reduce cost. It can help reduce time. It can help us find the right candidates to fill our positions without having to look for those people with PhDs that Paul mentioned. So I think that's part of what's really key here. The success of AI and how we as government agencies and industry are partnering to use is going to, I think, be successful in part with clear communications about what we're using it for, what the benefit is, and what the value is. What does it mean to me, the consumer of your service, whether you're an industry partner or whether you're a government agency providing a service like HUD or labor or transportation or anybody else. So, I think those three things are what I'd say I'm getting out of this. I want to get more, this is spurring a lot of thinking. And so this is, I think we're not at the top of the tidal wave, but the tidal wave is growing. And I think these kinds of discussions really help to focus.
Great. I love to hear that. Sarah, over to you.
Yeah, no, I have to agree with Michelle. I think like many of the key points that she identified definitely are resonating with me. I feel like a couple of years ago, we were asked this question, like culture would have been at the top of it, but it's almost like now, like we've all been dragged there. There's no, I mean, people, if they're not there yet, they're going to get there. Like they have to get there because there's no simplicity, the user experience, and then the value add, right? Those three things are super important. And those will be done by the prioritization that we talked about, right? Like where should our resources be focused? And if we can focus on those areas, identify clear prioritizations, or whether it's industry or government or the collaboration of the two groups, right? Like we could actually make some really strong societal pushes forward. But yeah, I think it's been a very helpful conversation. I think just like Michelle said, like my brain's kind of twirling around some of the ideas now.
Great. I love to hear that. And Paul, we will end with you, sir.
So yeah, I mean, my advice would be start small, get some wins under your belt. Don't try to eat the elephant in one bite. It's not an effective way to get executive buy-in, which is what you need for the adoption to go mainstream. And and don't hesitate to ask your SI partners for help. Have them come in and assess and start with an actual business problem. Identify the questions you need to ask or you need to have answered. And without that, again, it's just a science project. It's just a fishing trip, and it's really not going to go anywhere.
Well, thank you all so much. I'm going to ask you to smile for the camera. We're going to take a quick little screenshot of us here. 3, 2, 1. Thank you. I really appreciate you all being here. This has been a fantastic discussion. I got a lot out of it as well. And I want to thank everyone at home who's viewing and sent in questions, because it really helped us have a phenomenal conversation today, as well as an extra shout out to our sponsors at Snowflake for helping us put this together. And if you loved this conversation, I'm sure you'll love the next one. We'll have that posted here on the screen shortly, as well as our CPE credit. So if you are wanting your CPE credit from this experience, please reply yes if you do, no if you don't care. And our next event is actually going to be a ATARC Cybersecurity Executive Order Breakfast Summit. So this will be big. It's on November 8th at the Marriott Metro Center, and free breakfast for anyone who wants to attend. So I hope that you guys all go. Those are wonderful events, and really happy that we get to do these in person again. So thanks, everyone. Really appreciate the time. I'll see you at the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you.